Ancient builders wrote the laws of physics in stone. This video explores the astonishing idea that forgotten stone technologies from our distant past anticipated core concepts of modern physics. By the end, you will see these silent monuments not as simple relics, but as sophisticated devices whispering secrets across millennia. We will journey from resonant chambers that alter consciousness to walls that dance with earthquakes. How did cultures without formal science engineer structures that seem to defy their own time? What hidden chapter of human ingenuity is written in granite and limestone? Are we truly the first to understand the forces that shape our world? The air in these ancient chambers holds a memory of sound. Step inside a structure like Ireland's Newgrange, or descend into the underground labyrinth of Malta's Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, and you enter a space that feels fundamentally different. It is not just quiet, it is acoustically alive. Certain tones, a low hum or a specific chant, don't just echo here, they swell, they vibrate through the stone, they fill the entire chamber with a physical presence you can feel in your bones. This is not an architectural accident, it is a designed phenomenon, a clear application of acoustic principles crafted millennia before the science of sound was formally written down. Researchers in the field of archaeoacoustics have measured these spaces and found something extraordinary. The dimensions of the chambers, the shapes of the walls, the very composition of the stone, all seem engineered to amplify specific frequencies. At the hypogeum, a deep male voice sung at the right pitch can create a resonance that seems to emanate from the walls themselves, a phenomenon driven by standing waves. This is the same physics that allows a modern concert hall to feel immersive, or that an engineer uses to design a speaker cabinet, but here it was achieved through trial, observation, and a profound intimacy with material. The implication is staggering. These cultures may have been using sound as a technology. The resonant frequency of a space can directly affect human consciousness, altering brainwave patterns, inducing states of deep calm or heightened awareness. It is plausible these chambers were ritual spaces or even sites for healing, where the architecture itself became an instrument for transformation. They had discovered, through experience, that shaping stone in a particular way could shape the human experience within it. This leads to a compelling question. How do you tune a room without digital analyzers or mathematical models of wave propagation? How did they know which dimensions would create which effect? The answer likely lies in a slow, cumulative science of observation. They would have built, they would have tested with voice and instrument, and they would have learned. A builder might notice that a chamber of one size made a certain note feel powerful, while another size muted it. Over generations, this empirical knowledge became codified in tradition, passed down as the correct way to build a sacred space. They were mastering the physics of resonance by listening to the stone itself. This deep, material intuition hints at a forgotten scientific method, one that perceived physical laws not as abstract equations, but as living forces to be harmonized with. And if they could harness the invisible energy of sound, what other forces did they learn to converse with? The stones themselves learned to dance. High in the Andes, the walls of Machu Picchu and the fortress of Sacsayhuaman stand as a testament to a profound conversation between builder and earth. These are not static, rigid constructions. Look closely at the famous polygonal masonry, and you see a puzzle of irregular, interlocking blocks, each face uniquely shaped to fit perfectly with its neighbors. There are no straight lines, no uniform courses. This was not a stylistic choice. It was a brilliant seismic innovation crafted centuries before the term earthquake engineering existed. When the ground trembles, a modern rigid building tries to resist the motion, often leading to catastrophic failure as stress concentrates and cracks race through the material. But these Inca walls were designed for a different response. The intricate jigsaw of stones allows for tiny, controlled movements. Each block can shift, rotate, and settle minutely against its partner, dissipating the earthquake's energy through friction and countless small adjustments. When the shaking stops, the stones simply settle back into their locked position. This is a stunning anticipation of modern base isolation techniques, where structures are mounted on flexible bearings to let them move independently of ground motion. The Inca builders intuitively grasped principles of energy dissipation and load distribution. By creating a wall from many discrete, irregular units, they prevented a single crack from propagating. A flaw in one stone does not become a flaw in the entire system. This is a principle now employed in advanced materials science, designing concrete that cracks in a controlled, harmless way. What kind of observational genius led to this? It required a deep, generational understanding of local geology, of how the earth moves, and of how stone behaves under dynamic stress. They watched, they learned from failures, and they developed a technology of anti-fragility, building structures that did not just survive chaos, but were designed to thrive within it. Their walls are in a constant, silent dialogue with tectonic forces, a dialogue we are only now fully beginning to decode. And if they could design stone to move with the earth, what other forces did they learn to channel through their architecture? The stone's conversation with the earth finds its mirror in a silent dialogue with the sky. Across continents and cultures, the most enduring monuments are often precisely oriented, not to roads or rivers, but to the sun, the moon, and the distant stars. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its base is aligned to the cardinal points with an accuracy of less than a fraction of a degree, a feat of engineering that rivals modern surveying. Or witness Stonehenge, where the rising summer solstice sun pierces the monument's heart, framed perfectly by the ancient stones. These were not arbitrary placements. They represent a colossal, patient science of the heavens, etched permanently into the landscape. To achieve this, the builders had to master concepts we now call observational astronomy and celestial mechanics. They tracked the sun's slow, yearly journey, marking its northernmost and southernmost points at the solstices. They followed the moon's complex cycle, noting its subtle shifts over decades. Some scholars argue that structures like the Intihuatana stone at Machu Picchu or the Sun Dagger petroglyph at Choco Canyon even account for the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year wobble in Earth's axis. This is not casual stargazing. This is the application of long-term, meticulous data collection, turning generations of watchers into human computers tracking celestial patterns. The architecture itself became the scientific instrument. A massive stone doorway, a narrow corridor, a strategically placed window, these acted as fixed sightlines. They transformed the movement of celestial bodies into a predictable, observable event within the built environment. When the sunlight hits a specific carving only on the winter solstice, you have created a permanent calendar, a clock that ticks in yearly increments. This anticipates the very foundation of modern orbital mechanics, the understanding that celestial motion is regular, predictable, and can be mathematically described. They were mapping time itself onto space, using geometry to bind the earthly to the cosmic. The precision required raises profound questions. Without telescopes or written records of advanced mathematics, how was this knowledge gained and transmitted? The answer lies in a scale of time we often struggle to comprehend. A master builder would train an apprentice not for years, but for a lifetime, passing down alignments verified over centuries. A single correction to a temple's orientation might be the work of a generation. A slight adjustment noted after decades of watching a star rise just a hair out of line. Their science was cumulative, built on the patient observation of countless sunrises, its principles embedded not in textbooks but in tradition, myth, and the very angle of a cornerstone. This reveals a conception of the universe where the earthly and the celestial were intimately linked. By aligning their greatest works with the cosmos, they were asserting a harmony, a participation in a grand, orderly cycle. The structure was a conduit grounding celestial power and affirming humanity's place within a vast, intelligible system. It was a physics of connection, written in alignments of stone and light. If they could so precisely map the heavens onto Earth, what other invisible maps, what other relationships between force and form, might they have perceived that we have yet to rediscover? This mastery of celestial forces finds its earthly counterpart in a feat of staggering physical ambition. Transporting a 500-ton granite obelisk from a quarry to its sacred destination was an operation that bordered on the mythical. We are not talking about rolling a log or dragging a sledge with a few dozen people. This was moving a skyscraper laid on its side, a solid stone needle taller than a 10-story building, across miles of sand and rock. The logistical nightmare is almost incomprehensible. Yet wall carvings and archaeological evidence reveal a system of breathtaking ingenuity, a symphony of applied physics conducted long before the equations were written. They began with a colossal wooden sledge, a giant cradle upon which the obelisk was secured. But dragging that much weight directly on sand would be like trying to push a car through wet concrete. The friction would make it utterly impossible. So they transformed the ground itself. Workers would lay a track of wooden beams in front of the sledge, creating a temporary road. More astonishingly, they likely poured water onto the sand or clay in front of the runners. This simple act of lubrication was a stroke of genius. The water reduced the friction coefficient dramatically, turning a near immovable object into something that could, with immense effort, be slid. This is a direct, practical application of a principle Newton would later define: the idea that overcoming friction is a major part of moving any object. But water alone did not move the obelisk. That required the coordinated power of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of workers pulling on massive ropes. This is where the principle of leverage and force distribution becomes visible. The ropes were not all attached to one point. They were likely arrayed along the length of the sledge, with teams pulling at different angles. A commander, perhaps using drums or horns, would coordinate the pull, ensuring the force was applied as evenly as possible to prevent the sledge from digging into one side. This coordination transformed chaotic individual pulls into a single, massive net force in one direction, a practical understanding of vector addition. They were essentially creating a human engine, distributing the total required force across a vast array of smaller, manageable inputs. It was a distributed system of energy application, a living machine designed for one monumental task. This was not mere brute strength. It was physics orchestrated on a human scale, an empirical grasp of mechanics, material science, and organizational psychology. They understood that to move the unmovable, you must first outthink the problem. You must change the conditions of the challenge itself. By lubricating the path and coordinating the pull, they were not just moving stone, they were demonstrating a profound insight that the greatest forces in the world can be harnessed not by opposing them directly, but by cleverly redirecting their flow. If they could choreograph the movement of mountains, what other fundamental principles of energy and motion were woven into the fabric of their daily technology? The principles of moving massive objects reveal a culture in command of force, but to sustain a civilization requires the mastery of a more fluid element. Water is a relentless, shape-shifting force, and ancient engineers did not merely channel it. They conducted it with a precision that whispers of advanced intuitive physics. While Roman aqueducts are the famous example, the roots of this science run far deeper. On the island of Crete, the Minoans crafted elaborate terracotta pipe systems with tapered joints to manage water pressure, a technology over 3,000 years old. In the desert kingdom of the Nabateans, who built Petra, masterfully carved stone channels and dams collected every precious drop of rainfall, directing it through mountains with gradients so consistent they maintain flow to this day. These were not simple ditches, they were engineered systems that dealt with the invisible challenges of moving water over vast, uneven terrain. They harnessed gravity to create constant pressure, understanding that water from a high source could push itself through miles of channel and even upward across a valley in a sealed pipe, a principle we now call an inverted siphon. This is a direct application of what Blaise Pascal would much later formalize, that pressure in a confined fluid is transmitted equally in all directions. The builders knew through observation and trial that water seeks its own level. To cross a deep gorge, they would run a sealed stone or lead pipe down one side and up the other. The weight of the water column in the descending leg created enough pressure to force the water up the opposite side, as long as the outlet was lower than the source. This required an intimate grasp of hydrostatic pressure, the force exerted by a fluid at rest. They had to calculate the strength needed for their pipe walls to contain that pressure without bursting, a feat of material engineering. Even more subtle was their battle against airlocks, where trapped air could halt the flow entirely. The design of their systems, with carefully placed venting shafts or consistent slopes, shows they learned to manage this phenomenon empirically. How did they achieve such reliability without the equations of fluid dynamics? The answer lies in a long conversation with failure. A collapsed pipe taught them about pressure limits. A channel that silted up taught them about flow velocity. A siphon that stalled taught them about the importance of eliminating air. Over centuries, this accumulated, practical knowledge was codified into building traditions. The precise gradient of a Nabatean channel, falling just a few centimeters every meter, was a number born from generations of observation, a data point etched into the landscape itself. They were mapping the mathematical behavior of water onto stone, creating a predictable, life-giving system in the heart of a desert. This was physics as a lived practice, a dialogue between human need and natural law, resulting in technologies that stood not for decades but for millennia. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that some of our most profound understandings of the world were first felt in the flow of water through a stone conduit, long before they were ever written in a book. That dialogue with water reveals a mastery of fluid force, but to create a sanctuary from the desert sun demanded a quieter, more patient kind of genius. Walk through the narrow streets of an ancient Persian city, and you will see slender towers rising above the rooftops, their faces open to catch the slightest breeze. These are wind catchers, and they are not mere decoration. They are sophisticated climate machines built entirely from stone, mud brick, and an intimate understanding of the air itself. Inside, a labyrinth of cool subterranean channels or a simple courtyard pool awaited the air drawn down from above. Here, in the stillness, a silent exchange of energy took place. The hot, dry wind from the tower would pass over the water's surface, triggering evaporative cooling. The air would shed its heat, becoming denser and cooler, before being gently pushed into the living spaces below. Meanwhile, the thick earthen walls of the home, possessing high thermal mass, had spent the night releasing stored coolness. They would slowly absorb the day's heat, preventing it from penetrating the interior, only to release that heat back into the cool night air. This is a flawless, passive application of the laws of thermodynamics, crafted millennia before the concepts were formally named. The builders were exploiting convection, the natural movement of fluids based on temperature and density. They were using thermal inertia, the resistance of a massive material to change temperature, and they were harnessing the phase change of water, where evaporation requires energy, drawing heat directly from the air. Every element of the structure was an integrated component in a zero-energy system. The orientation of the wind catcher to prevailing breezes, the depth of the underground spaces, the placement of water features, all worked in concert to create a stable, comfortable microclimate against the desert's extremes. This is not just clever architecture, it is ancient bioclimatic design. It anticipates modern passive solar principles, where a building's materials, shape, and placement work with the environment to regulate temperature. The entire structure functions like a thermal battery, charging and discharging energy in a daily cycle, maintaining balance without a single moving part. It demonstrates a profound, intuitive grasp of energy transfer and conservation, the core ideas of thermodynamics. They understood that heat flows from hot to cold, and they designed pathways to guide that flow beneficially. They knew that energy is not created or destroyed, merely moved and transformed, and their buildings became the instruments of that transformation. What is perhaps most humbling for our modern world is the elegance of its simplicity. This was a zero-carbon, zero-electricity technology that provided comfort for centuries. It required no external fuel, only an intelligent reading of the local environment and a willingness to work with its rhythms, not against them. In an age of complex mechanical systems and immense energy consumption, these silent stone climate systems ask us a poignant question. Have we, in our pursuit of overpowering nature, forgotten how to listen to its logic and collaborate with its inherent intelligence? This ancient synergy between shelter and environment points toward a physics that was not just understood, but lived within, a science of harmony written in the very temperature of the air. The very composition of the stone may hold the deepest secret of all. Among the most enduring puzzles is the sheer perfection of certain ancient masonry, like the mind-bendingly precise blocks of Puma Punku in Bolivia or the seamless joints in the Great Pyramid's inner chambers. The edges are razor-sharp, the surfaces glassy smooth, and the fits so tight that not even a sheet of paper can slide between them. For generations, we assumed this was the work of unimaginable labor and consummate skill with simple tools. But a provocative alternative theory is gaining attention, one that suggests the builder's greatest tool was not a chisel, but a chemical recipe. This is the theory of ancient geopolymer chemistry, the idea that some of these stones were not cut but cast. Imagine a builder not hauling a multi-ton block from a distant quarry, but instead mixing a slurry of locally available materials, crushed limestone, specific clays, water, and perhaps a natural alkaline activator like ash from burned plants. Poured into a wooden formwork, this mixture would undergo a chemical transformation. Over time, a process called geopolymerization would bind the particles together at a molecular level, creating a synthetic stone that is, for all intents and purposes, identical to natural rock. This is not modern Portland cement, but a different, highly durable chemistry based on aluminosilicates. The implications are staggering. It would mean that these cultures possessed a form of materials science, understanding how to manipulate Earth's ingredients under specific conditions to create a tailored product. They would have needed empirical knowledge of chemistry, recognizing that certain mixtures, when combined with water and allowed to cure, would harden into a substance with incredible compressive strength and weathering resistance. This technology, lost for millennia, was essentially reinvented in the 20th century. Today, geopolymer cements are studied as a more sustainable alternative to traditional concrete, praised for their durability and lower carbon footprint. The theory elegantly solves several logistical mysteries. Casting blocks in place eliminates the need to move impossible weights. It explains the uncanny, complex shapes at Puma Punku that look less like carved stone and more like prefabricated components. It accounts for the absence of tool marks on certain surfaces and the presence of what appear to be air bubbles or organic material trapped within the stone, features more consistent with a poured material than a carved one. Of course, this idea is fiercely debated. Mainstream archaeology points to evidence of quarrying and tool marks elsewhere, but the possibility remains a tantalizing challenge to our narrative of technological progress. If true, it means ancient builders were not just stone workers, they were molecular architects. They weren't just shaping rock, they were convincing it to become something new, guiding a chemical reaction to birth a synthetic material with properties they desired. This is a leap from manipulation to transmutation, a quiet mastery over the very building blocks of the physical world. It suggests a forgotten chapter in human ingenuity where the line between natural and artificial blurred, long before our modern age of composites and engineered materials. Their legacy, then, might be frozen not just in stone, but in the recipe for the stone itself. That mastery of material and chemistry finds its ultimate expression in a form that seems to defy the very ground it stands upon. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not just a pile of heavy rocks, it is a mountain engineered with impossible precision. Its base is a near-perfect square, its sides aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy that would challenge modern surveyors. This is more than just careful craftsmanship, it is a profound physical statement. To level a 13-acre foundation of bedrock to within a fraction of an inch, the builders had to establish a plane perfectly perpendicular to the local pull of gravity. They were, in essence, mapping the invisible force field of Earth itself onto a colossal stone canvas. How did they achieve this? The most plausible method involves water. By cutting a network of shallow trenches across the site and filling them with water, they could create a continuous, level surface from which to measure. Any high point would be cut down until it was just at the water's surface. This simple yet brilliant technique used water's natural tendency to seek its own level, a property governed by gravity, to define a true horizontal plane across the entire construction site. It was a direct, practical application of gravitational principles, turning a fundamental force into a construction tool. The pyramid's very shape speaks to an intuitive grasp of load and stability. The gradual inward slope of the faces channels the immense weight of over 2 million blocks downward and inward, distributing the colossal compressive forces evenly into the bedrock. This minimizes points of concentrated stress that could cause catastrophic failure. It is a masterclass in structural integrity, anticipating the modern engineering concepts of load paths and compressive strength. The builders understood, through experience and perhaps trial, how to make stone behave, how to get it to support its own unimaginable weight for eternity. This leads to the most tantalizing speculations. Some researchers note that the pyramid's dimensions and proportions seem to encode mathematical relationships, including a very close approximation of the constant pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. Others point to its geographic placement, nearly centered on the longest land parallel, suggesting a possible, though hotly debated, awareness of Earth's dimensions. Whether these are intentional or coincidental is a mystery that fuels endless debate. But the undeniable truth is this: the architectural precision on display required a working model of the physical world. They had to conceive of forces, of balance, of geometric truth, and then translate those concepts into a built reality of staggering scale. Their conceptual model of the force that holds the world together may not have been called gravity, but they clearly understood its unwavering direction and its relentless pull. They built in harmony with it, using its constancy as the foundation for their greatest work. The pyramid stands as a silent testament to a physics of alignment, where human ambition was meticulously squared with the fundamental forces of the cosmos. If they could so perfectly align a mountain of stone with the Earth's hidden fields, what other conversations with the fabric of reality might have been encoded into their world, conversations we are only beginning to hear? These silent patterns on stone may be a forgotten language of vibration, scattered across ancient temples and sacred objects, from Celtic knots to Hindu yantras, are intricate, repeating geometric designs. We often call them art or symbolism, but what if they are something more, a visual record of a hidden physics? The modern science of cymatics reveals a stunning clue. When a metal plate covered in sand is vibrated at specific frequencies, the particles arrange themselves into perfect geometric forms, circles, hexagons, even complex mandalas. The sound, an invisible force, writes its signature in matter. This raises a profound question. Did ancient observers discover this same principle, witnessing how rhythmic drumming on a stretched hide or chanting over a pool of water could organize chaotic materials into ordered patterns? If so, the spiral on a megalith, the interlocking circles on a temple frieze, may not be mere decoration. They could be diagrams of resonance, maps of how vibration structures reality. These patterns often appear at sites with remarkable acoustics, places where sound was clearly important. By carving the visual echo of a sacred tone into the walls, the builders could have been creating a symbolic resonator, a permanent anchor for a specific harmonic order. It bridges the gap between the physical and the symbolic in a way we are only beginning to appreciate. This is not just about sound as a wave, but about vibration as a foundational creative force. In their worldview, the universe might have been seen as a great, humming instrument, with everything from a stone to a star vibrating at its own frequency. The geometric patterns then become snapshots of cosmic harmony, frozen moments of that universal vibration made visible. This ancient intuition finds a startling echo in the furthest frontiers of modern physics. String theory, for instance, proposes that the most fundamental particles are not tiny dots, but unimaginably small, vibrating loops of energy. The properties of matter itself, from an electron to a photon, are determined by how these strings vibrate. While the ancient carver and the modern physicist are separated by millennia and methodology, they converge on a similar, profound idea that vibration is the fundamental code of reality. One expressed it in stone mandalas, the other in mathematical equations. This symbolic resonance suggests they saw no hard line between science and spirituality. The pattern was both a diagram of a physical phenomenon and a portal to a metaphysical truth. It encoded a law of nature, the principle that frequency creates form. By studying these stones, we are not just looking at ancient art. We might be reading a primer on a unified field theory, written not in words, but in shapes that whisper of a world built from sound. The open ocean presents the ultimate test of navigation, a featureless blue desert where every horizon looks the same. Yet, long before satellites or magnetic compasses, Polynesian voyagers were routinely crossing thousands of miles of this vast emptiness, finding specks of land with pinpoint accuracy. Their instrument was not a device, but a profound, embodied understanding of the world in motion. They practiced wave piloting, a skill that reads the language of the sea itself. An experienced navigator would lie in the hull of his canoe, feeling the complex interplay of swells. Each island group, with its unique underwater topography, creates a distinct interference pattern in the ocean's rhythms. These refracted waves become a signature, a constant directional beacon that can be felt even on the cloudiest nights. This is a real-time, physical application of inertial navigation. By maintaining a mental model of his starting point's wave pattern and continuously observing the shifts in swell direction, speed, and interaction, the navigator could deduce his vessel's movement relative to a fixed, though invisible, point. He was tracking his trajectory through a living grid of moving energy, using the ocean's own dynamics as a gyroscope. On land, this cosmic and oceanic knowledge was anchored in stone. Across the Pacific, certain rock structures, cairns, and sacred platforms are precisely aligned to key star risings and settings, or to the consistent direction of dominant swells. These were not arbitrary monuments. They formed a scattered but precise network of fixed reference points, a stone curriculum for teaching the moving sky and the patterned sea. A student would learn at such a site, memorizing which star rose over that particular rock when a specific swell direction could be felt on the coast. This fused astronomy with oceanography into a single, holistic science of wayfinding. It anticipated the very principle of the modern inertial guidance system, which uses internal sensors to track every acceleration and rotation from a known starting point, calculating position without any external signal. The Polynesian navigator was that sensor, his memory the computer, and the star compass etched in his mind the software. This technology, passed down through chants and stories, reveals a model of Earth that was dynamic and intimately known. They did not see a static map, but a living, breathing organism of currents, winds, and celestial cycles. Their navigation required the Earth to be a sphere, for the star paths to make sense over such distances. It demanded an intuitive grasp of relative motion, understanding their canoe's movement within multiple overlapping systems, celestial and oceanic. What does this say about their physics? It tells us they perceived the world as a web of interconnected forces and rhythms. Success depended not on conquering nature, but on listening to it with exquisite attention, on becoming a part of its patterns. Their greatest invention was not a tool, but a way of knowing, a seamless fusion of observation, memory, and embodied intuition that turned the entire Pacific into a charted highway. In their silent dialogue with swells and stars, they mastered a physics of context, where position was not a dot on a page, but a constantly updated relationship within a symphony of motion. The stones may have held a subtle charge. Beyond their visible grandeur, many ancient sacred sites are now reported to generate unusual electromagnetic fields. Walk through the inner chamber of the Great Pyramid with a sensitive magnetometer, or stand in the center of a remote stone circle, and instruments sometimes detect localized anomalies, pockets where the Earth's natural magnetic field is distorted or amplified. These effects are often subtle, measured in tiny fractions of a Gauss, but they are persistent. The cause is likely a confluence of natural and engineered factors. Subterranean water flowing through limestone caverns beneath a temple can generate weak electrical currents through a process called the streaming potential. Specific mineral compositions in the stones themselves, like high concentrations of quartz, which is piezoelectric, could amplify ambient vibrations into minute electromagnetic pulses. Even the geometry of the structures might focus or channel these natural energies, much like an antenna. The critical question is whether the builders knew. Did they, through dowsing or simple bodily sensitivity, seek out these telluric hotspots, these places where the Earth itself seemed to hum with a faint, invisible energy? There is intriguing, though controversial, research in modern biophysics exploring how extremely low-frequency electromagnetic fields, similar to those found in nature, can interact with human biology. Such fields have been shown in laboratory settings to influence brainwave patterns, potentially nudging the mind toward states of calm or heightened awareness. If the ancient architects were aware of this, even empirically, it reframes their purpose. The site selection and the very design become a form of bioenergetic engineering. The structure is not just a shelter or a symbol, it is an interface. Its purpose is to create a specific environment that subtly alters the consciousness of those within it, facilitating ritual, healing, or visionary experience. This idea ventures into a frontier where physics meets perception. It suggests these technologies were not merely physical machines, but tuned instruments for the human nervous system. The stones, the water, the geometry, all conspire to generate a field that the human body, with its own innate electrical systems, can detect and respond to. This is not about supernatural power, but about a sophisticated understanding of environmental influence. It posits that the most profound function of a sacred site might be invisible, a gentle, persistent dialogue between the magnetism of stone and the electricity of life. While mainstream science rightly calls for more replication and study, the reports themselves invite us to expand our definition of ancient technology. Perhaps their greatest innovation was learning to build places that didn't just house the spirit, but actively conversed with it through the silent language of physics. Stone endures crushing weight far better than it handles being pulled apart. This is the simple, profound challenge ancient builders faced whenever they wanted to create an opening, a doorway or a window in a wall of solid rock. They had to span empty space with a material that is incredibly strong in compression but notoriously weak in tension. Look up at the colossal lintel stones resting atop the uprights at Stonehenge, or at the enormous single slab forming the doorway of a Mycenaean beehive tomb. These are not just architectural features, they are brilliant solutions to a fundamental physics problem, crafted thousands of years before engineers had the mathematics to explain why they worked. The builder's goal was straightforward: keep the stone in a state of pure compression, letting it do what it does best, bear down. The moment you suspend a horizontal stone between two supports, its own weight tries to bend it. The top surface gets squeezed together, but the bottom surface gets stretched apart. Since stone fractures easily when stretched, that bottom edge is the point of failure. To prevent this, they developed two key strategies. The first was the corbelled arch seen in tombs across the ancient world. Instead of a single spanning stone, they would lay successive courses of masonry, each one protruding slightly inward over the one below. This creates a stepped ceiling where every stone is primarily pressing down on the one beneath it, with minimal bending stress. The weight gets channeled diagonally down the sides of the structure, following natural stress trajectories. The second, more daring solution was the massive single lintel. Here, the sheer size and careful shaping of the stone itself was the answer. By making the lintel exceptionally deep and thick, they moved its neutral axis, the line within the beam that experiences neither compression nor tension, as low as possible. This minimized the tensile forces on the bottom. More importantly, the precision of the fit was everything. The lintel had to sit perfectly flat and level across the tops of the uprights, distributing its immense load evenly down the center of each support. Any uneven settling would create a bending moment, a twisting force that could introduce fatal tension. The selection of stone was another act of intuitive material science. They favored dense, fine-grained rocks like bluestone or sarsen at Stonehenge, which have a consistent internal structure without weak planes or large inclusions. A stone with a coarse, irregular grain would be far more likely to crack under its own weight. This reveals a deep knowledge of local geology, an understanding that not all stone is created equal for such a critical task. How did they arrive at these reliable rules without a formal science of strength of materials? The answer is written in ruins across the landscape, in the collapsed lintels and cracked arches that did not survive. Trial and error on a monumental scale was their laboratory. A community would build a tomb, and if the lintel cracked in a generation, the next builders would make it thicker or choose a different quarry or adjust the bearing points. Over centuries, this empirical data became tradition. The correct proportions, the proper stone, the essential technique, these were hard-won discoveries passed from master to apprentice. They learned to see the invisible lines of force flowing through their structures, to visualize how weight wanted to travel to the ground. By honoring that natural path, by designing so that stone was always pushing, never pulling, they created openings that have stood for millennia. This silent, steadfast endurance is a testament to a physics felt in the hands and seen in the success of a structure that simply refuses to fall. Light itself became a tool for marking celestial time. Deep within the Great Pyramid, two narrow shafts, barely the width of a human hand, angle upward from the king's chamber toward the outer surface. For a long time, they were simply labeled air vents. But their precise alignment tells a different story. One shaft points directly toward the star system of Orion's belt, as it would have appeared around 2500 BCE. The other targets the North Star of that era, Thuban in the constellation Draco. These are not random holes, they are sightlines carved through millions of tons of stone, a staggering feat of engineering for a purpose far beyond ventilation. They demonstrate a masterful understanding of rectilinear propagation, the fundamental optical principle that light travels in straight lines. The builders knew that to channel a specific star's light into the heart of the monument, the shaft had to be a perfectly straight tunnel, an unwavering geometric line connecting the interior to a single point in the night sky. On the rare celestial moments when the alignment was exact, these shafts would have transformed. A thin, piercing beam of starlight would have descended through the darkness, perhaps illuminating the chamber's sarcophagus with an otherworldly glow. This was astronomy made tangible, a direct physical connection between the earthly tomb and the eternal stars, engineered into the very fabric of the building. This principle of using apertures to manipulate light finds another breathtaking expression in the Pantheon of Rome. Its massive dome is crowned by a single circular opening, the oculus. This is not a window, it is a cosmic instrument. As the sun arcs across the sky, its light pours through this opening, creating a brilliant disk of illumination that travels across the interior walls and floor. The beam is not static, it moves with the sun, its position and intensity changing with the hour and the season. On the spring equinox, the noon sun strikes a specific point on the interior's lintel. By the summer solstice, the spot of light is lower on the wall. The entire rotunda becomes a colossal, enclosed sundial, marking the passage of time with silent, majestic precision. This is mnemonics, the science of timekeeping with shadows and light, elevated to an architectural scale. It also showcases projective geometry, where the three-dimensional path of the sun is projected onto a two-dimensional surface inside the building. The builders were not just letting light in, they were sculpting it, directing it, and using its predictable motion as a clock and a calendar. These technologies anticipate core ideas of optics that would be formalized much later. The camera obscura effect, where light passing through a small hole projects an inverted image of the outside world onto a surface, is a direct relative of these ancient light shafts. While there is no evidence the pyramid builders created projected images, their understanding of the necessary conditions, a dark chamber and a precise aperture, is strikingly similar. They grasped that light carries information about the world outside, and that by controlling its entry, you could control the message it delivered inside. So what was the ultimate purpose of these sophisticated, light-based machines? The practical answer is celestial timekeeping. The moving sunbeam in the Pantheon or the star-aligned shaft in the pyramid created an infallible astronomical calendar, crucial for agriculture and ritual cycles. But the symbolic purpose runs deeper. In both cases, light is not merely illumination, it is a sacred actor. It animates the architecture. It turns a stone chamber into a theater where the cosmos performs. The moment a specific star's light touches the heart of a pyramid, or the sun's disk aligns with a temple's altar, the boundary between heaven and earth dissolves. The structure becomes a conduit, proving the harmony between human creation and cosmic order. This suggests their science and their spirituality were woven from the same thread, a unified quest to capture, understand, and participate in the fundamental rhythms of light itself. The stones in these walls were never meant to be still. Look closely at the ancient dry stone constructions found from the Scottish Highlands to the terraced slopes of the Andes. Built without a drop of mortar, these walls are a tapestry of interlocking shapes, each block resting securely against its neighbor, yet each one fundamentally independent. This is not a frozen monolith, it is a dynamic system. The genius of its design lies in the tiny spaces, the minute gaps and irregular contact points between each piece of rock. These are not flaws, they are features. When the wind howls across the landscape, or when the faint tremor of distant activity passes through the ground, the wall does not resist the vibration as a single, rigid mass. Instead, the energy is absorbed and transformed. Each stone can shift ever so slightly against its partner. The vibrational energy is converted into tiny movements and the heat of friction, dissipating harmlessly into the network of the wall itself. This is a masterclass in passive damping, a principle that is absolutely critical in our modern world. Today, engineers install massive tuned mass dampers in skyscrapers to counteract sway from wind, and they design base isolators for bridges to absorb seismic shock. The ancient builders achieved a similar effect using only geometry and gravity. They created structures that could breathe, that could flex and settle without compromising their integrity. This required a profound, intuitive understanding of how energy propagates through a material. They knew that a vibrational wave, whether from an earthquake or a pounding storm, travels along the path of least resistance. By constructing a wall from countless discrete units, they created a labyrinth for that energy. Each joint between stones acts as a scattering point, breaking up the coherent wave, redirecting it, and robbing it of its destructive power. The wall does not fight the force, it invites it in and gently disassembles it. This approach embodies a philosophy of resilience that feels strikingly modern. In an era where we design for sustainability and longevity, the dry stone wall stands as a testament to antifragility, a system that doesn't just withstand disturbance but is inherently designed to benefit from it. Every minor tremor simply settles the stones more firmly into their interlocked embrace. This raises a compelling question for our own time. Our contemporary infrastructure often relies on monolithic materials and rigid connections, which can concentrate stress and lead to catastrophic failure. What if we look to these ancient masonry techniques not as primitive, but as sophisticated? Could we reverse engineer this principle of micro-movement, designing modern buildings with engineered joints that allow for controlled flexibility, that dampen vibrations before they can build into destructive resonance? The silent, enduring dry stone wall offers a quiet lesson in humility and intelligence. It suggests that sometimes the most advanced solution is not to overpower a natural force, but to design a conversation with it, creating a technology that endures not by being unyielding, but by knowing precisely how to yield. The sky our ancestors saw was not the one above us tonight. Earth's axis wobbles with the slow patience of a spinning top, tracing a vast celestial circle over 26,000 years. This is Precession, a cycle so immense it defies the scale of a single civilization. Yet, etched into stone and story, there are hints that this grand celestial rhythm was known. The inner shaft of the Great Pyramid, aligned to the star Thuban, points to a North Pole that vanished millennia ago. The myths of many cultures speak of world ages ending and beginning in cycles that span tens of thousands of years, a symbolic echo of this astronomical reality. These are not coincidences, they are the signature of a science that thought in epochs. To encode precession into architecture, a culture must have maintained precise astronomical observations not for decades, but for centuries, perhaps even 1,000 years. The position of a star shifts by a single degree roughly every 72 human lifetimes. Detecting that minuscule drift requires a tradition of watching that is unbroken, a sacred duty passed from priest to apprentice across generations. The monument itself becomes the permanent record. When a temple doorway is aligned to a star that will not be in that position again for 13,000 years, it is a message cast in stone, a fixed point in the turning heavens saying, "We were here and we saw this." This is more than calendar keeping. It is an anticipation of the modern concept of deep time, the understanding that the cosmos operates on scales that humble human history. They perceived the sky not as a static backdrop, but as a slow, majestic wheel. How could such long-term knowledge survive without the written word? It lived in ritual, in ceremony tied to specific celestial events. It was woven into the foundational stories of a people, myths that encoded astronomical truths in the language of gods and heroes. The precise orientation of a stone was not just a building technique, it was a chapter in a living oral textbook. An elder would point to a star rising over a specific marker and recite the story that went with it, a story that contained the observational data of his ancestors. This method transformed myth into a data storage system, resilient and portable. It suggests a culture that saw its own place within a vast, unfolding cosmic story. Their monuments were not just for the present, they were anchors thrown into the river of time, meant to hold meaning for generations they would never meet. In aligning stone to a shifting pole star, they demonstrated a profound faith in continuity, a belief that their descendants, too, would look up and understand the silent, slow dance they had charted in rock. The stones themselves could hold a subtle, latent charge. Deep within the earth, certain crystalline minerals, most notably quartz, possess a hidden ability. When compressed, struck, or even vibrated, their atomic structure shifts in a way that generates a tiny electrical potential. This is piezoelectricity, a principle of solid-state physics formally identified in the 19th century. Yet, there are intriguing hints that this phenomenon may have been encountered, and perhaps even utilized in the distant past. In various ancient sites, from the passage tombs of Europe to the temples of Mesoamerica, archaeologists have noted the deliberate inclusion of quartz-rich stones in specific high-traffic areas. These stones form the paving of a ceremonial pathway, line the floor of a resonant chamber, or are embedded in ritual objects meant to be struck or rubbed. The placement is often too consistent to dismiss as mere coincidence. Imagine a procession of participants walking in rhythm across a floor paved with such stones. With each synchronized step, a collective mechanical stress is applied. Or consider a priest striking a quartz-laden altar with a ceremonial staff. In the quiet, focused atmosphere of a ritual, these actions could generate a faint but detectable crackle of static electricity, a series of minute blue sparks in the dim light, or simply a localized tingling in the air. Without the vocabulary of electrons and charge, how would such an experience be interpreted? It would likely be perceived as a tangible manifestation of spiritual energy, a physical sign of divine presence or ancestral power awakening in response to human action. The ceremony itself becomes the switch that turns it on. This is where the line between technology and ritual dissolves entirely. The architecture and the object are not just symbolic, they are functional components in a circuit with human movement as the power source. The spiritual experience is not separate from the physical effect, it is amplified by it. The subtle electric sensation, the visible spark, would have validated the entire ritual framework, providing direct sensory evidence of a connection to another realm. This intuitive application of a complex physical principle speaks to a mode of understanding that worked through embodied experimentation. A builder might have noticed that certain stones felt different when walked upon in a group, or that a particular rock sparked when struck during a ceremony. Over time, this observed correlation between action and phenomenon would become encoded in tradition, the specific stone and the specific practice forever linked. Today, this intersection of physical stimulus and spiritual feeling is a subject of modern study in fields like neurotheology, which examines how sensory stimuli, from rhythmic chanting to flickering light, can influence brain activity and induce states of perceived transcendence. The ancient use of piezoelectric materials suggests they were pioneers in this realm, crafting environments where the very architecture participated in the ritual, generating the conditions for an experience that felt quite literally electrifying. It presents a compelling vision of the past where the sacred was not an abstract concept, but a force that could be felt in the air and drawn from the stone with a careful, practiced step. The immense weight of a megalith is a sleeping giant. To awaken it, to coax it into motion across miles of rugged terrain, required more than raw strength. It demanded a practical, working knowledge of mass in motion, an intuitive grasp of the principles Newton would later formalize as the laws of inertia and momentum. Every stage of transport was a calculated dance with these invisible forces. The first and greatest challenge was inertia, the stubborn tendency of a massive object to remain at rest. Overcoming that initial resistance was the critical threshold. Builders likely employed a symphony of simple machines. Levers, perhaps massive timber poles, would be inserted beneath the stone. Teams would push down on the long end, using the fulcrum to multiply their force, coaxing the edge of the block upward just enough to slide rollers or a sledge underneath. This is a direct application of Newton's second law, that a net force is required to change an object's motion. They were calculating through experience exactly how much force, applied where, would break the stone's static grip on the earth. Once in motion, the goal shifted from overcoming inertia to preserving momentum. Here, the enemy was friction. The brilliant lubrication of wet sand or clay before the sledge runners was a strategic move to reduce the opposing force that constantly sapped the stone's hard-won momentum. But there may have been another technique, one rooted in human rhythm. Coordinated pulling is efficient, but synchronized, rhythmic pulling is something more. Imagine the lead puller setting a cadence with a drum or chant. On each beat, every team member would pull in unison, applying peak force simultaneously. This creates a series of powerful impulses, each one adding to the stone's forward motion. Between pulls, the stone's own momentum would carry it forward, its massive weight resisting a quick stop. This pulsed application of force is remarkably efficient, turning a steady, grueling drag into a more manageable series of coordinated efforts. It transforms the human team into a living piston engine, converting rhythmic biological energy into sustained mechanical motion. The logistics behind this operation reveal a staggering command of practical physics. Distributing the stone's mass evenly on the sledge was crucial to prevent it from digging into the ground. The selection and placement of ropes were not random, they were about vectoring force. Ropes attached at different points along the sledge helped pull it straight, correcting its course by applying sideways tension, a real-world lesson in resolving forces into components. The coordination of hundreds of pullers required not just a foreman but a conductor, someone who could perceive the net force vector and adjust the teams accordingly to keep the colossal load moving true. This was applied dynamics on a scale we can barely comprehend, a continuous, real-world experiment where the cost of failure was a stranded, immovable mountain. Their consistent success tells us this was not a desperate gamble. It was a refined, repeatable process honed over generations. It was kinetic engineering, a tradition where the formulas were written in the strain of ropes, the angle of ramps, and the rhythm of the work song. They learned to converse with mass, to persuade it, to build a fragile alliance with momentum that could carry a piece of a mountain to its sacred home. Legends whisper of stones that danced to the sound of a drum. From the deserts of the Middle East to the highlands of Tibet, stories persist of ancient builders using sacred chants, trumpets, or singing bowls to make massive blocks float into place. As a literal feat of anti-gravity, this defies our current understanding of physics. Yet, within these myths lies a fascinating seed of truth, a blurring of observed phenomenon and symbolic meaning that speaks to a deep, intuitive relationship with vibration. Modern laboratories can show us the bridge. Scientists today use devices called acoustic levitators, which employ precisely tuned sound waves to create a standing wave pattern. Within the nodes of this pattern, where the pressure is perfectly balanced, small droplets of water or even tiny solid particles can be suspended, hovering in mid-air as if by magic. It is a stunning demonstration that sound, an invisible force, can indeed exert pressure and influence matter. The scale, of course, is incomparable. Levitating a pebble is one thing, moving a 10-ton monolith is another. The energy required would be astronomical, likely shattering the stone before lifting it. So, if literal levitation of megaliths was not the technology, what truth might these enduring stories be preserving? One compelling possibility is psychological coordination. The rhythmic beat of a drum, the unified chant of 100 voices, these are powerful tools for synchronizing human movement. Imagine a team tasked with pulling a massive sledge. A steady, driving rhythm would help every person pull in perfect unison, turning individual effort into a single, colossal force. In the exhausted, transcendent state of such communal labor, the stone might indeed feel as if it were moving almost of its own accord, lightened by the power of the sound itself. The myth then becomes a metaphorical truth, a cultural memory of how collective rhythm and shared purpose achieved the impossible. Another, more physical interpretation involves the use of sound as a diagnostic tool. Before metal tools, one of the great challenges of quarrying was finding natural fracture lines in bedrock. A skilled worker might tap a rock face with a hammerstone, listening intently to the sound it produced. A clear, ringing tone might indicate solid, flawless stone, while a dull thud could reveal a hidden crack or flaw. In essence, they were performing a primitive form of acoustic resonance testing, using sound to see inside the stone. It is a small step from this practical technique to a legend of stones responding to song. Furthermore, the intense, focused vibration from sustained chanting or instrument playing might have been used in very specific contexts, perhaps to help settle a giant lintel onto its supports by creating minute vibrations that allowed for finer adjustments, or to test the integrity of a placed stone. The stories that survived are not engineering manuals. They are the distilled essence of an experience, where the line between the physical effect of sound and its psychological impact vanished. In the ritual space of construction, sound was not just a tool, it was a participant. It organized labor, it revealed hidden truths in material, and it fostered a collective state of mind where incredible feats felt divinely assisted. These myths represent the intersection of physics and perception. They tell us that ancient cultures understood vibration as a fundamental, creative force, one that could align human intention with material reality. The legend of the floating stone is not a falsehood to be dismissed, but a profound metaphor to be decoded, a reminder that our ancestors saw the universe as a place where matter and energy were in constant, resonant conversation. The proportions of a leaf and the spiral of a galaxy share a silent mathematical language. This same language is written into the dimensions of our most ancient monuments. The golden ratio, approximately 1.618 to 1, appears with startling frequency in nature, from the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower to the curve of a nautilus shell. It is a proportion the human eye finds inherently pleasing, a balance between symmetry and dynamism. When we measure the Pantheon in Athens, we find its facade fits neatly into a golden rectangle. The Great Pyramid's base perimeter to its height gives a close approximation of 2 pi. These are not random measurements, they are the deliberate application of universal constants, suggesting the builders saw geometry not just as a tool for construction, but as the very grammar of creation. Their use implies an understanding of proportional harmony that linked aesthetics directly to structural integrity. A building designed with these ratios is not only beautiful, it is inherently stable, its forces distributed in a balanced, efficient way. This is where mathematics, art, and physics become one. The appearance of pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, in a pyramidal structure is particularly telling. It suggests they may have been thinking in spherical terms, perhaps conceptually squaring the circle, a profound geometric challenge that symbolizes the unification of earthly and celestial realms. In modern physics, the golden ratio emerges in unexpected places, in the branching of lungs, the spin of subatomic particles, and the large-scale structure of the cosmos. It seems to be a fundamental principle of efficient growth and optimal packing in nature. The ancient masons, by embedding these constants in stone, were declaring that their architecture participated in this cosmic order. They were building local manifestations of a universal rule. So where did this knowledge originate? One compelling path is direct, patient observation of the natural world. A master sculptor studying the growth pattern of a pine cone or the petals of a flower could discern a repeating proportional relationship. Through generations of working with materials, they would have empirically discovered which proportions produced the most stable arch, the most pleasing facade, the structure that felt most alive. This practical geometry, born from the workshop and the garden, would then be elevated to a sacred principle, a divine blueprint. Another possibility is that this knowledge was part of a deeper, perhaps initiatory tradition, where certain mathematical truths were seen as keys to understanding the fabric of reality, taught only to those who would use them to honor the cosmos. Whether derived from the spiral of a seashell or the vision of a sage, the result is the same. They identified and utilized mathematical constants that we now recognize as fingerprints of a deeply ordered universe. Their temples and tombs are not just piles of rock, they are frozen equations, three-dimensional arguments about the nature of harmony itself. They built not only with stone, but with the invisible numbers that structure everything. The architecture itself could trick the eye into seeing the impossible. Walk into the forecourt of an ancient Egyptian temple, and you are met by towering walls that do not stand straight. They slope inward, leaning toward each other as they rise, a subtle but deliberate choice known as batter. This is not a structural flaw, it is a perceptual masterstroke. Your brain, trained by a lifetime of experience, expects parallel lines to recede toward a vanishing point in the distance, but here the lines converge above you. This creates a powerful forced perspective, making the walls appear impossibly tall, as if they are stretching toward infinity. The same principle is at work in the pyramids. The precise angle of the faces and the clever use of casing stones, now mostly lost, played with light and shadow in a way that made the massive structure seem to dissolve at its edges, merging with the sky. From a distance, it did not look heavy, it looked like a geometric mountain of light ascending. These builders were not just engineers of stone, they were engineers of human perception. They understood, long before the Renaissance painters formalized the rules of perspective, that the brain could be guided to see what was not literally there. They used the physics of light and the geometry of form to create an illusion, a feeling that defied the laws of gravity and mass. The goal was transcendence. By making stone appear weightless, by making a building seem to reach into the heavens, they were crafting a direct sensory experience of the divine. You did not just hear about the gods, you felt their scale, their otherworldly nature, through the very architecture that surrounded you. This is a psychological technology, a built environment designed to trigger specific cognitive and emotional states. It anticipates modern discoveries in cognitive science about embodied cognition, the idea that our physical surroundings directly shape our thoughts and feelings. The sloping walls do not just look tall, they make you feel small, humble, and awestruck. The ascending lines pull your gaze upward, lifting your attention from the earthly to the celestial. Every angle, every shadow was a tool in a silent ritual of perception. Consider how a filmmaker today uses a low camera angle to make a character seem powerful, or forced perspective in a movie set to make a model city look vast. The ancient architects were doing the same thing, but their set was permanent, and their audience was a procession of worshippers moving through a sacred script written in stone. They knew that belief is not just an idea, it is an experience, and they used the principles of visual physics to construct that experience from the ground up. The temple was a machine for consciousness, where the boundary between the physical and the spiritual was blurred by a carefully calculated trick of the light. This reveals a layer of intention that goes far beyond mere construction. They were thinking about the viewer, about the journey, about the story the building would tell to the senses. In manipulating perspective, they demonstrated a profound insight that reality is not just what is built, but what is perceived. Their legacy is a reminder that the greatest structures are those that change not just the landscape, but the mind of the one who stands within them. The horizon is a promise of level ground, but to build a civilization you must first command it. Before a single stone of an aqueduct could be laid, or the first course of a pyramid set, ancient engineers faced a foundational challenge, creating a perfectly level reference line across acres of uneven earth. Their solution was elegantly simple and profoundly intelligent. They asked water to show them the way. They used a tool known as a water level, sometimes called a merchant, which was essentially nothing more than a long, flexible hose, perhaps made from animal gut or early forms of tubing, filled completely with water. The principle at work is one of the most reliable in nature: hydrostatic equilibrium. In a connected body of fluid at rest, the pressure is equal at any point of the same height. In practical terms, this means the water surface at both open ends of the hose will always settle to exactly the same level, regardless of the distance between them or the contours of the land in between. To use it, builders would place one end of the hose at a master benchmark, a chosen starting height. They would then carry the other end to any point across the sprawling construction site. By observing where the water settled in their end of the hose, they could mark a spot that was perfectly level with the starting point, even if it was hundreds of feet away and out of direct sight. This humble tool provided a horizontal datum line of incredible accuracy, rivaling what we achieve today with laser levels over similar distances. Imagine the coordination this enabled on a site like the Great Pyramid. Teams working on opposite corners of the massive 13-acre base, unable to see each other over the rising courses of stone, could still ensure their work was progressing on the same perfectly level plane. They were all connected by an invisible line of water pressure, a shared reference that guaranteed harmony across the entire project. This technology was essential for the Roman aqueducts, where a consistent, gentle slope was the difference between a flowing channel and a stagnant ditch. A deviation of just a few inches over miles would doom the system. The water level allowed them to map that precise gradient across valleys and hills, creating the skeleton for their iconic arches. It was used in the vast agricultural terraces of the Andes and Southeast Asia, where retaining walls had to be stepped in perfect horizontal courses to prevent collapse and manage irrigation. Every time they used it, they were applying a fundamental law of fluid physics. They did not need the equation for hydrostatic pressure. They understood its behavior through direct manipulation. They knew water could not lie. It was an honest partner in their ambition. This simple tool represents a beautiful synthesis of elements, using the fluidity of water to achieve precision in solid stone, bridging two realms to create a third, the built environment. It speaks to a methodology that looked to nature not just for materials but for instructions, finding in the quiet level of a pond or the still surface of a cup the universal standard for human creation. The true genius of these ancient systems lies not in isolation but in their elegant convergence. No single monument was built to harness just one force of nature. The masterwork was in the orchestration of many. Consider the Pantheon in Rome, a structure that stands as a symphony in stone. Its massive dome, the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, is a masterpiece of material science. The builders did not use a uniform mix. They cleverly varied the aggregate, using heavier, denser stone at the base and progressively lighter materials like porous pumice toward the top. This gradient managed the immense compressive forces by lightening the load where the stresses were greatest, a brilliant, intuitive grasp of statics. Yet this dome is pierced by its famous oculus, the great eye open to the sky. This opening is not a mere window, it is a multifunctional instrument. It channels a sweeping beam of sunlight that charts the hours and seasons across the interior floor, a monumental sundial. It also serves as a natural ventilator, allowing hot air to rise and escape while drawing in cooler air from below, creating a passive cooling system that leverages convection. And the entire geometry of the rotunda, from the diameter of the dome to the height of the cylinder, is built upon harmonic proportions, ratios that the human ear and eye find inherently balanced. Here, in one unified space, the principles of material strength, celestial optics, fluid thermodynamics, and sacred geometry are woven together into a single, seamless experience. This is not a collection of separate tricks, it is holistic design. It reveals a mindset that saw the building not as a collection of parts, but as an integrated system, a microcosm where every element was in dialogue with every other. The acoustics of the space, the play of light, the flow of air, and the distribution of weight were all considered as interconnected variables in one grand equation. This anticipatory philosophy mirrors the very essence of modern interdisciplinary engineering. Today, when we design a sustainable skyscraper, we do not just consider its strength, we model its energy consumption, its seismic resilience, its internal climate, and even the psychological impact of its spaces. We optimize across multiple physical domains simultaneously, seeking synergy. The ancient master builders were pioneers of this very approach. They were perhaps the first true systems engineers, thinking in networks of cause and effect long before such concepts had names. Their goal was to create a synergy between different forces of nature, to build a stone envelope that could converse with light, air, sound, and gravity all at once. The structure itself becomes a unified physical model of their understanding of the cosmos, a place where the laws of the universe were made tangible and harmonious. This integrated vision suggests their knowledge was not a list of disconnected facts, but a coherent worldview, a deep intuition that everything is connected, and that true power lies not in dominating a single force, but in conducting the entire orchestra. Every perfect stone began as a flawed attempt. The silent eloquence of these ancient structures was not a sudden revelation, but the hard-won result of a conversation with failure that spanned lifetimes. Behind every soaring arch that stands today are the memories of countless others that collapsed, their rubble serving as the most profound textbook available. This was a science of the hands and the eyes, built on empirical trial and error. A community would erect a wall using a certain technique, only to watch it succumb to a harsh winter or a minor tremor. The next generation, learning from that visible lesson, would adjust the angle, choose a different mortar, or select stones with a tighter grain. A builder might notice that a chamber of one particular shape made a chant resonate with haunting power, while another shape deadened the sound. These were not theoretical calculations, they were physical experiences, data points written in success and ruin. Knowledge was accumulated not in libraries, but in the collective memory of the craft, passed from elder to apprentice through demonstration and story. The correct way to build became tradition, and tradition was simply the sum of all previous experiments that had not ended in disaster. This slow, iterative refinement is the very heartbeat of the scientific method, conducted on a generational scale. Their laboratory was the landscape itself, and their experiments were full-scale constructions meant to last for ages. The data they collected was structural performance over decades and centuries, a longitudinal study in resilience. A temple that stood for 100 years proved its design. A bridge that collapsed under a flood taught a crucial lesson about hydrodynamic pressure. This long-term dialogue with materials and forces required immense patience and a willingness to learn directly from the physical world. It reveals a humility before nature, an understanding that the builder did not impose will upon stone, but rather negotiated with it, discovering its laws through attentive practice. When we look at a dry stone wall that has flexed with 1,000 earthquakes, we are not seeing a lucky guess. We are witnessing the final, optimized version of a design that was tested and improved across more human lifetimes than we can easily fathom. Their legacy challenges our modern bias toward theory-first innovation. It reminds us that profound understanding can emerge from the ground up, from careful observation and the relentless refinement of technique. This practical, embedded science built a world that still speaks to us, not in equations but in the enduring language of stone. The silent testimony of stone is now being translated into the precise language of data. Across the globe, a new kind of explorer is arriving at ancient sites, not with shovels and brushes alone, but with tripods, sensors, and powerful computers. These interdisciplinary teams, blending archaeology with physics and engineering, are applying tools like three-dimensional laser scanning, ground-penetrating radar, and sophisticated acoustic modeling to ask the stones new questions. Their mission is to move beyond legend and measure the physical reality of these places with an accuracy our ancestors could never have imagined. This rigorous, quantitative analysis is revealing something extraordinary. Many of the legendary properties whispered about for centuries have a verifiable basis in measurable physics. The resonant chamber that was said to hold power, the wall that danced with earthquakes, these are not just metaphors. They are engineered phenomena, and we can now prove it. Studies using sensitive microphones and frequency analyzers inside sites like Newgrange in Ireland or the Hypogeum of Malta have mapped their acoustic signatures with exacting detail, confirming the existence of powerful standing waves at specific, low frequencies. The sensation of sound becoming physical, of a space humming with energy, is no longer mystical. It is a chart on a spectrogram. Similarly, engineers using computer simulations to model the polygonal masonry of Inca walls can now visualize, in a digital space, exactly how seismic energy flows through that intricate stone puzzle, dissipating harmlessly through countless micro-movements. The legendary resilience is a function of brilliant, intuitive design, and the data provides the blueprint. This research is actively closing the gap between myth and material science. What was once the domain of speculation and awe is steadily becoming a catalogue of sophisticated techniques, each with its own rationale rooted in the natural world. It is a thrilling convergence of eras where our most cutting-edge technology is being deployed to decode a different kind of cutting-edge technology, one forged in patience and deep observation. We are, for the first time, equipped with the tools to fully appreciate the ingenuity we are measuring. This dialogue between past and present is more than just validation. It is a collaborative rewriting of history. Each data point from a laser scan, each frequency reading from a chamber, adds a new sentence to a story we thought we knew. It transforms ancient builders from anonymous laborers into peerless engineers, their monuments from silent ruins into active experiments we are only now learning to read. The stones have been waiting for this conversation, and as we listen with our instruments, they are beginning to speak in a dialect we finally understand. These silent conversations with stone invite a profound shift in how we view history itself. For generations, the story of human knowledge has been told as a steady, upward climb, a straight line from simple tools to complex machines, from myth to science. We imagine our ancestors slowly, inevitably, figuring things out on their way to us. But the evidence written in these monuments paints a far more intricate picture, a tapestry where threads of deep understanding appear, fade, and are later rewoven. This isn't a story of primitive versus advanced. It is a story of different kinds of knowing. The ancient approach was fundamentally holistic. Physics was not a separate discipline from spirituality. Engineering was not divorced from community ritual, and architecture was an expression of cosmic harmony. They sought not just to understand forces, but to harmonize with them, to build a resonant relationship between human life and the natural world. Their science was embedded, lived, and deeply contextual. They may not have had the equation for gravity, but they knew how to level a 13-acre foundation by its unwavering pull. They didn't have a theory of acoustics, but they could tune a chamber to transform consciousness with sound. This was a functional, integrated mastery, where the proof was in the enduring performance of the structure itself. This challenges our modern paradigm of extreme specialization, where an acoustician, a structural engineer, and a theologian would rarely speak the same language, let alone collaborate on a single, unified vision. Their success forces us to reconsider what we label as progress. It suggests that profound insight into the fabric of reality can be achieved through paths other than the one our civilization took. And that such knowledge is fragile. It can be lost when the living tradition that carries it breaks, when the songs are no longer sung, or the meaning behind the alignment is forgotten. This realization opens a haunting question. If we have so thoroughly overlooked the sophistication in these stones for centuries, what other forms of intelligence, what other ways of understanding our world have we dismissed or simply failed to recognize? Their legacy becomes a mirror, asking us to examine the blind spots of our own technological age. Perhaps most urgently, their model of innovation offers a crucial lesson for our time. They saw nature not as a warehouse of resources to be exploited, but as a partner, a teacher, and a source of laws to be collaborated with. Their technologies were synergistic, designed to work within ecological systems, not dominate them. In an era defined by ecological crisis, this symbiotic relationship stands in stark contrast to our often extractive and disruptive methods. The dry stone wall that dances with earthquakes, the wind catcher that cools without fuel, the temple aligned to celestial cycles, these are testaments to a sustainable physics. They demonstrate that the most elegant and enduring solutions often arise from attentive listening, from a deep dialogue with the environment rather than a monologue of control. Their stone technologies whisper of a different kind of advancement, one measured not in sheer power, but in resilience, harmony, and longevity. They invite us to expand our definition of innovation beyond merely what is new, to include what is wise, what is integrated, and what endures in graceful balance with the world that sustains us. The enduring stone of the past offers a living blueprint for the future. What we have uncovered in these ancient sites is far more than a historical mystery. It is a catalogue of sustainable solutions, patiently waiting for our modern world to recognize their relevance. The principles of passive cooling, seismic resilience, and energy-free climate control are not new inventions. They are rediscoveries perfected in stone millennia ago. Today, a growing movement of architects and engineers is turning to these vernacular technologies, not for nostalgia, but for urgent, practical inspiration. They are looking past the glass and steel of our current paradigm to study how ancient builders achieved comfort and stability without fossil fuels or complex machinery. The answer lies in a fundamental shift in perspective, from dominating the environment to collaborating with it. These builders used local materials not just for convenience, but because they understood the unique properties of the stone from their own region, its thermal mass, its acoustic qualities, its response to stress. They oriented structures to catch prevailing breezes and channel water through gravity-fed systems, working with natural forces as partners in the design. This approach results in what we now call biophilic and resilient design, but for them, It was simply the logical way to build a lasting home. Consider the modern challenge of cooling a building in a hot, arid climate. Our default solution is energy-intensive air conditioning, which creates a cycle of high demand and carbon emissions. Yet the ancient wind catcher and courtyard pool system achieved the same goal passively, using convection, evaporation, and thermal mass to create a stable, comfortable microclimate. Contemporary architects are now adapting this very principle, designing buildings with thermal chimneys, subterranean cooling tubes, and water features that leverage evaporative cooling, drastically reducing or even eliminating mechanical cooling needs. Similarly, the seismic dance of polygonal masonry is inspiring new forms of flexible, disaster-resistant construction. Engineers are exploring the use of interlocking, precast concrete blocks or designing joints in modern buildings that allow for controlled movement during an earthquake, dissipating energy much like those ancient walls. This is not about copying the aesthetic, it is about reverse engineering the physics, translating an intuitive understanding of energy dissipation into new materials and forms. The lesson is profound. True resilience is not about being unbreakable, but about being adaptable, about designing structures that can gracefully absorb disturbance. On a broader scale, this ancient wisdom challenges our entire philosophy of material use. They achieved staggering durability with astonishing material efficiency, often shaping or even creating stone with a deep respect for its inherent qualities. In an age of concrete, one of the world's largest sources of carbon emissions, their geopolymer chemistry hints at alternative, low-carbon binders that we are only now beginning to reinvent and scale. By studying how they made the most of so little, we can learn to design for longevity and circularity, where buildings are not disposable, but are crafted to endure and evolve. This is not a retreat to the past, but an advancement informed by deep time. It is about building a future where our technology is not a burden upon the planet's systems, but exists in harmony with them. The silent, steadfast monuments are more than relics, they are mentors. They hold within their geometry and material a forgotten conversation about balance, a dialogue we desperately need to relearn. In their patient endurance, we find a question for our own frantic age. What if the most advanced design is not the one that consumes the most energy, but the one that needs the least? We have walked through a landscape where stone speaks the language of physics. We have felt the resonance in ancient chambers, witnessed walls that dance with earthquakes, and traced the alignment of monuments to the slow turn of the stars. These forgotten technologies reveal a past not of magic, but of profound acuity, where humanity observed the natural world with a patience we can scarcely fathom, and engineered solutions that hum with principles formalized millennia later. This journey was never about attributing supernatural knowledge or lost civilizations from beyond the stars. It is about recognizing the staggering depth of human ingenuity right here in our own ancestral lineage. It is about honoring a different path to understanding, one woven from observation, material intimacy, and a holistic vision of the cosmos. The builders did not have our equations, but they had something equally powerful, a lifetime of watching how stone behaves under stress, how sound fills a space, how water finds its level. They turned these observations into a lived science embedded in tradition and etched permanently into the earth. This realization invites a deep humility. Our story of progress is not a simple, straight line from primitive to advanced. It is more like a spiral where insights are gained, forgotten, and rediscovered in new forms. The ancient mastery of passive cooling or seismic resilience does not make them more advanced than us, but it clearly shows they were not less. They were sophisticated in ways we are only beginning to measure, and in ways we desperately need to remember. Their legacy challenges us to look at the ancient world with new eyes, not as a museum of crude beginnings, but as a repository of brilliant, sustainable solutions. Those stones were their laboratories, their libraries, and their testaments to a harmony with forces we often try to overpower. So I encourage you, the next time you see an image of a megalith or walk past an old stone wall, pause for a moment. Consider the conversation it represents, the deep dialogue between human mind and material world. What do you think these silent teachers are still trying to tell us? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to continue exploring history's greatest mysteries with us, be sure to subscribe. The stones are still talking. We just need to remember how to